Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan, and this is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, restoring the tariff truce. The US and China have reached a framework deal to ease export controls. But who drove the hard bargain? And will the plan help to resolve deeper trade issues? It is the world's top-performing currency. Russia's ruble is surging despite crippling Western sanctions. So what's behind the remarkable rally, and at what cost to the rest of the economy? And welfare or warfare? Britain boosts defense spending and cuts social programs, sparking anger across the country. So are the UK and other nations choosing guns over social protections? The United States and China appear to have walked back from the brink of a devastating trade war. But maybe not. For now, they say they've agreed to get their trade truce, which was reached in Switzerland last month, back on track. They've reached, in principle, a framework deal to roll back some of the punitive measures that they've taken against each other's economies. Now, that means Washington could ease restrictions on selling chips to China if Beijing agrees to speed up the export of rare earths. Now, whether that happens depends upon the approval of Presidents Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. The plan, reached after 2 days of talks in London, marks the latest twist in a trade war that's threatened to disrupt global supply chains. Negotiations to resolve the wider tariff war will continue, but the truce settles, for now, growing tension between the two economic superpowers. Milena Veselinovic reports.
After 2 days of talks, some progress. Chinese and US negotiators emerging late at night in London to say they will, for now, stick to the fragile truce they agreed on a month ago in Geneva.
Our communication has been very professional, rational, in-depth and candid. The two sides agreed in principle on the framework for implementing the consensus of the two heads of state in their phone call on June the 5th, as well as the consensus of the meeting in Geneva.
Details were sparse, but the US side hinted the deal will involve lifting export restrictions both sides imposed on each other, including rare earth minerals, crucial for modern technology.
We do absolutely expect that the topic of rare earth minerals and magnets with respect to the United States of America will be resolved in this framework implementation. That is a fundamental part of that. Also, there were a number of measures the United States of America put on when those rare earths were not coming. You should expect those to come off sort of, as President Trump said, in a balanced way.
Washington had accused Beijing of dragging its feet on lifting curbs on rare earth exports introduced in the wake of US tariffs in April. China holds a near monopoly on the minerals, which are essential to the production of cars, smartphones and defense systems. In response, the US blocked Chinese access to technologies like semiconductors and artificial intelligence and tightened visa rules for Chinese students. The deal struck here in this building may bring the two sides back from the brink of renewed confrontation, but it leaves the core tensions unresolved. US President Donald Trump's tariffs and America's long-standing complaints about China's state-led economic model. If these two superpowers can't find a lasting agreement, the risk is a full-scale trade war, one that could shake the global economy and stunt growth for years to come. Milena Veselinovic, Al Jazeera for Counting the Cost, London.
Manfred Elsig is the Deputy Managing Director and the Director of Research of the World Trade Institute at the University of Bern. He joins us now from there. Manfred, you and I are having this conversation, of course, before either Presidents Trump or Xi have rubber-stamped the deal. But what do you make of it? President Trump says it's a done deal. If it helps in the wider tariff trade war, is it a win-win deal for both sides?
Well, thanks, Adrian, for the question. It's hard to say at this stage. I think it is not very substantial. I think we need to think about the bigger picture here, which is basically the US wanting to decouple from China. And now we're trying to kind of look at the costs of this process. And it's sort of one step in a longer process of negotiations. But at the moment, I don't see really anything very substantial in this deal.
Did any side in this negotiations have the upper hand. Will the US, do you think, really lift its restrictions on semiconductors, for example? Did China play the rare earths card well?
Yeah, you can see this is a typical negotiations where both sides have actually good cards. And so I think the Chinese have a very strong card with the rare earth critical minerals. And so you see we have sort of like a 6 months period now where the Chinese say they will be doing this in a sort of more sort of less restrictive way, those export sanctions. And the US side, what we see in the US side is they are enlarging the pie. So basically they are talking about the US Chinese student visas. And so you're seeing, I think the US has not the same tools at the moment at disposal. And the rare earth issue is a really critical one for the US.
Yeah, who needs what more here? If the US goes ahead and lifts restrictions on the export of semiconductors, I mean, reversing the Biden administration policy, that's one thing. And is that because, I mean, the US desperately needs these rare earths?
I think they need it for the next couple of years because, again, for this transition to happen, we need time. At the same time, I think the US will not lift export sanctions on the high end of semiconductors. They're not going to go that far. They announced some export restrictions will be lifted on aircraft, on ethane, for instance, but not, I think, the most critical ones from a national security perspective. So we will see in the next couple of months how far the US is willing to go. I doubt they will go that way.
Did these talks break any new ground at all, or was it just a reset? Are we back to square one, back to where we were after the talks in Switzerland?
I think it's a continuation of the talks in Switzerland. We had some bumps coming up now. And so it's not really a change. And also in terms of tariffs, we don't really see a change. They seem to be substantial. I think down the road, we'll see large tariffs on both sides. And the question is how much on the export restrictions will be lifted. And that's the big question going forward for me.
I wanted to ask you, can we now all breathe a sigh of relief? And from what you're saying, probably not, that this isn't going to solve the wider trade war between the US and China. Just, I mean, how bad could things get?
Well, we are in the middle of a trade war. So basically now it's sort of the question, how do we manage this trade war? I think it's not the worst right now, as we can see that the tariffs have been at least substantially lowered to what they were announced to. But I think we are in a situation we will have to deal with for months to come. So we're not really done with the trade war. We're in the middle of the trade war. And this is just one little episode of a couple of steps that will be taken the next couple of months to see what is actually going to be implemented from this first framework laid out in Geneva last month.
They are the world's two largest economies. Whatever happens between them affects us all. Does either side have the upper hand in any trade war, or are we at impasse? I mean, is there any way forward through negotiations? Do you think sooner or later someone is going to have to cave?
I do not think there's going to be a caving as such. There'll be some equilibrium at some stage. An equilibrium, again, that sort of is a function of the tariffs that will be decided and how much export restrictions there will be. That will be an equilibrium, and the rest of the world has to deal with this. There will be, of course, a lot of secondary effects on third markets. So a lot of Chinese products already have tried to find new markets. And so that's going to affect the whole sort of world economy going forward. And we'll see a reshuffling of a lot of supply chains the next couple of years if this continues the way it does right now.
All right, so to use a football analogy, we're more or less at half time. We've got the whole second half to go. It's not over yet.
I think we're in the first 15 minutes of the game. I mean, it's still a long way to go.
Manfred, who's hurting more right now? Okay, we're 15 minutes into the game, but which side is on top?
I think it's a very, the situation is such that both are hurting. This trade war is hurting both sides in different ways, but it's hard to think about a winner of a trade war. Both will be losing out. And so it's just a question how long it will take that they will agree on the framework, but actually putting really meat around the bones of this framework, and then the rest of the world can continue working with that framework. Because at the moment, the biggest threat to the world economy is this uncertainty. We don't know where that trade war is going. And so companies and firms have a hard time to adapt to this new situation.
Manfred, it's been really good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Perfect. Thanks for having me.
Now, while the US dollar weakened amid Trump's tariff turbulence, Russia's ruble posted strong gains against the greenback this year. In fact, it's become the world's best performing currency so far, with gains even exceeding those of gold. According to Bank of America, the ruble has gained more than 40% against the dollar so far this year, despite crippling Western sanctions. But while a strong ruble might cheer traders, the upturn in fortunes for the currency could come at a high cost for the Russian economy. The stronger currency, coupled with a plunge in oil prices, threatened to diminish Russia's energy export revenues. Experts have attributed the ruble rally to capital controls and the central bank's tight monetary policy, which has reduced demand for foreign currency. Now, in the past months, Moscow's military spending spree has pushed up inflation, prompting Russia's central bank to boost interest rates to a record high of 21%. A tight monetary policy is almost always a boon for a currency's strength. But in a surprise move last week, Russia's central bank lowered its interest rate for the first time since late 2022, despite an inflation rate that remains well above target. The Bank of Russia cut its key rate to 20% from 21% and said it expects the economy to return to a more, quote, balanced growth path. Separately, the EU is doubling down on its attempts to deprive Russia of revenue needed to fund its war in Ukraine. The European Parliament introduced a 6.5% tariff on fertilizers imported from Russia and Belarus last month. This after the bloc recently ramped up its purchases of the country's fertilizer products. Russian fertilizer exports to the EU rose by more than 33% in 2024 alone, to around $2 billion. The EU has recently announced new sanctions against Russia, including a proposal to lower the price cap on Russian oil exports from $60 to $45 per barrel. Nuria Kapralou is a Russian economist and economic advisor. She joins us from Athens. Good to have you with us on Counting the Cost. Is the Russian economy as healthy as figures perhaps suggest?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And with regard to Russian economy, it depends what figures you're looking at. If you are looking at ruble strength, then maybe it's not representative of the strength of the economy. If you are looking at other statistical data like industrial output or household consumption, that paints another picture. Industrial output is indeed growing, driven by the military industrial sector. Household consumption is also rising, although in the last few months the growth has been moderated, and that actually has encouraged Bank of Russia, among other factors, to decrease key rate from 21% that you mentioned to 20%. Other factors are very tight labor market, which on the one hand shows that the Russian economy is progressing quite quickly, is growing quite quickly. On the other hand, it also shows that it has some potential barriers to this growth in the future.
Is this strong ruble sustainable in the long term for the Russian economy? What damage could it do in the long run?
Well, the path of ruble exchange rate is not predetermined, and in fact, I believe that ruble is going to weaken over the next few months. The fundamental factors that are going to lead to gradual ruble devaluation would be lower interest rates, gradual reduction in interest rates, and lower global oil prices. So the current strength is not sustainable.
Are Western sanctions against Russia having any effect at all on the Russian economy? Are they doing what they were intended to do?
Well, I suggest to look at it from two different angles. Did they have any effect at all? Yes, they did have an effect, very strong impact in 2022 and early 2023. The economy since then, the impact since then is waning. What we see now in terms of total impact, it looks more like delinking of Russian economy from the Western partners rather than substantial degrading. And that was the point probably of sanctions, that was the sanctions that were introduced to weaken the economy and stop the war. Having said that, I should mention that we don't yet see, we cannot really assess how technological sanctions have impacted productivity, for example. That would, in the longer term, determine how if Russian economy has.
All right.
If Russian economy has.
No, carry on, Nuria. Finish.
Lost the competitive position in the global economy. Another weakness is that sanctions have do not have clearly identifiable goals. So the total impact would depend on who you ask. It will, so it's wide open to interpretation, really.
Nuria, it's been really good talking to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Now, citing the growing threat from Russia, Europe is racing to boost its military capabilities. Nations across the continent have come under pressure from the Trump administration to spend more on defense and to decrease their reliance on the US. Among them is Britain, which has recently unveiled plans to radically overhaul its military capacity. They include building new nuclear-powered submarines and boosting the production of drones and missiles. Now, that means spending billions of dollars more to meet the goals of making its armed forces war-ready. But with constrained public finances, can the nation afford additional defense spending? And will it come at the expense of social welfare? Lina Abu Akleh reports.
Tax the rich and stop the cuts. Protesters on the streets of London rallied against the Labour government's plan to reduce welfare spending while increasing funding for defence. Prime Minister Keir Starmer is under pressure to increase the UK's military capabilities. US President Donald Trump says NATO allies in Europe need to take more responsibility for their own security in the context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
We are moving to warfighting readiness as the central purpose of our armed forces. When we are being directly threatened by states with advanced military forces, the most effective way to deter them is to be ready. And frankly, to show them that we're ready, to deliver peace through strength.
And to do that, the Prime Minister plans to build at least 6 new munitions factories to create a hybrid navy that uses aircraft, drones, warships and submarines to patrol the North Atlantic. And invest $20 billion in the country's nuclear weapons program, among other things. Starmer says all this will cost around $18 billion a year. Some economists say it will be far more. Washington allocates around 3.4% of its GDP to defense and wants its allies to match that figure. But the official NATO target is still only 2%, as decided in 2014. European countries may find, as has the UK, that defence spending increases that come at the cost of social welfare programmes will not be popular. Starmer says investing in the military is an investment in job creation, but that's unlikely to be much comfort to people still struggling with the cost of living crisis. Lina Abu Akleh, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Well, European nations could soon be required to raise their defence spending even further. NATO is expected to ask nations to increase their share from 2% of GDP to 5% in its summit later this month, something that President Trump has openly called for. Now, that could lead to cuts in other key areas like healthcare and education. In France, for example, around 30% of GDP goes to social protection. It currently spends just above 2% on defence. The UK says that it's slightly boosting its expenditure to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, with an ambition to get to 3% over the longer term. Poland is the only country that comes close to the proposed 5%. It's currently at around 4%. Now, the US spends roughly 3.4%, and by comparison, Russia spends more than 7% of GDP on defense, while China, which has the world's second largest military budget after the US, spends about 1.7%. Gire Gozgo is an associate professor of economics and finance at the University of Bradford. He joins us now from there. Good to have you with us on Counting the Cost. I just wonder whether the UK and other nations here are being bullied into increasing their defence spending right now.
Okay, so thank you very much for having me. Yes, in some respects, the UK has faced pressure from the NATO allies to increase the defense spending. In particular, given that the global instability has increased after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. However, Labour has emphasized that any increase must be fiscally responsible and aligned with the long-term planning. So I believe that this is not just a reactive response to the external demands. There is also an internal policy implication which is believed by the government, that the higher military expenditures can also lead to a higher economic growth in the UK economy in the long run.
So have the UK and other countries literally had to choose between war or welfare, defence spending or making welfare cuts? What sort of impact is this going to have on welfare states in the long run?
Yes, so you're right. So the idea is actually coming from the previous government that the UK must slash the welfare expenditures to fund the defense expenditures. However, if you look at the policy of the Labour government, they reject the austerity-driven cuts to service for the public services, and instead they are focusing on the economic growth and fairer taxation. So rather than cutting the funds, the government believes that the higher economic growth can increase the income, then they can also create a fairer tax regime, which can fund the military expenditures.
All right.
So I think there will be no return to austerity. So the Labour government will try to find the defense expenditures, to fund the defense expenditures through the higher economic growth and fairer tax regimes in the long run.
Right, focusing on the UK in particular for just a moment, cutting welfare programmes, social spending is not something you'd expect a Labour government to do. Why don't they just raise taxes to pay for this?
Yeah, because they want to focus on both security and social justice. So actually, if you look at the previous Labour government, which is a long time ago, Labour has historically supported fair taxation, such as windfall tax rates or higher tax rates of top earners to find the public goods. So I believe instead of cutting welfare, they will go for higher income taxes for maybe the wealthy people, or maybe unearned income or excessive corporate profits, something like that, to finance the military expenditures.
We've established that the UK at the moment can't exactly afford to implement the military spending that it wants to. Are other EU nations facing the same dilemma, or are they perhaps better positioned financially to increase their defence spending?
Yeah, as you talk, or you discuss in the news, that many EU nations, especially France and Germany, are also increasing, or they are pushing to increase their defense spendings. But we should note that they have a stronger welfare system compared to UK economy due to the higher corporate tax and personal tax rates. And in addition to this, most of the EU countries are planning to use a multi-year budgeting to avoid sudden possible cuts. So but I'm unsure that whether they have many years to restructure their defense forces amid this, increasing global uncertainty and global instability.
Gide, it's been really good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, Pakistan has also ramped up its defence spending for this fiscal year. The government has unveiled its budget, which also includes spending cuts and tax rises. The cash-strapped country, which has relied on bailouts from the International Monetary Fund since 1958, aims to boost economic growth. The IMF approved a $7 billion loan last year, but many say they're yet to see any benefit of that. Kamal Haider reports from Islamabad.
As angry opposition politicians protested, the government presented its budget for the new fiscal year. The government says it expects the economy to grow by 4.5% in the coming 12 months.
The Prime Minister of Pakistan has always tried to reduce tax burden on salaried class. Hence, a significant relief is proposed and income tax slabs for salaried persons. This relief will not only simplify tax structure, reduce tax burden on middle class, but it will ensure balance between take-home salary and inflation.
But economists say that will be difficult, if not impossible task. Already thousands of public sector workers are on the streets, protesting against what they see as an unfair budget. Increased taxes on employees, businesses and exporters are leading to growing resentment over job losses and falling revenues.
We reject this budget, which allocates a 10% increase in the salaries of government employees. We are protesting against the government's unjust policies as they neglect the needs of lower-grade employees and ordinary citizens, while disproportionately increasing funds to satisfy parliamentarians, raising their salaries by 600%.
The recent tensions with India and fears of further confrontation means additional government spending on defense, which is likely to increase by 20%. The effects of climate change and resulting loss of cash crops has put an additional burden on an economy struggling to stay afloat. The opposition is calling it a budget dictated by the IMF.
This budget actually does not represent the true mandate of people. Budget is always made by legislators who have been chosen by the people's vote. In our case, our members, those who won, were denied the victory, and those who were imposed on us have made this budget. This budget has nothing for poor people of Pakistan.
Ordinary people say they are already overburdened by a cost of living crisis. Experts warn that with millions of people living below the poverty line, the government's digitalization plan, which aims to transform Pakistan into a cash-free economy and stamp out tax evasion, are bound to fail. A country living on an IMF lifeline, plagued by mismanagement and the flight of capital, offers little relief of an early recovery. Kamal Haider for Counting the Cost in Islamabad.
And that's our show for this week. If you'd like to comment on anything that you've seen, you can get in touch with us. I'm at A. Finnegan on X. Please use the hashtag AJCTC, or you can drop us a line. Countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our email address. As always, there's plenty more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page, and there you'll find individual reports, links, and entire editions for you to catch up on. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the home team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again. The news on Al Jazeera is next.